I never imagined that a seemingly ordinary business trip could unravel the carefully constructed life I'd spent years building. My name is Andrew Collins, and I've always taken pride in being a devoted husband and a diligent professional. For decades, my life had followed a steady rhythm: endless business meetings, intercontinental flights, and negotiations that stretched late into the night. In the midst of this whirlwind, I cherished the sanctuary of home, a place that, at first glance, promised constancy and comfort. At home, my wife Michelle was the pillar who maintained everything with effortless grace. We'd met in college, bonding over long study sessions and shared dreams. Our connection blossomed into a deep, natural love, one that felt as inevitable as the sunrise. Michelle's independence and self-reliance were traits I admired, in some quiet moments, even envied. She handled life's challenges with a cool determination that, though reassuring, also subtly hinted at an inner world I knew little about. For years, our life together was built on predictable routines. During the week, I would disappear into a haze of boardroom presentations, client calls, and endless business trips. The weekends were reserved for brief but meaningful phone calls with Michelle, moments that served as a fragile thread connecting our two very different worlds. I convinced myself that the distance between us was only temporary, that our love could easily bridge the gaps. I even joked with colleagues about my lucky partner who managed everything so seamlessly. Yet, I would soon learn that the very independence I had so admired could also be a double-edged sword. The first unsettling hint came on a mundane Tuesday evening while I was staying at a hotel after a long day of negotiations. I was alone in my modest room, scrolling through messages on my phone, when an unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. Curious and slightly wary, I answered. On the other end was a gruff, measured voice belonging to a man who introduced himself simply as Samuel. He explained that he lived just across the street from my home and had been quietly observing the neighborhood for years. With an air of reluctant duty, he mentioned that he'd witnessed something unusual involving my family, a revelation he felt compelled to share. Initially, I dismissed Samuel as nothing more than a cantankerous old man with too much time on his hands. His claim, that he was a retired police officer with a keen eye for detail, felt like the rambling of someone set in his ways. Yet, as he calmly outlined his observations, his tone carried an unsettling certainty. Samuel told me that his years on the force had taught him to notice even the subtlest deviations from normality, and what he had seen did not sit right with him. Despite my skepticism, a seed of doubt was planted in my mind, though I quickly tried to brush it aside. The next day at the airport, hurrying through crowded terminals and navigating hectic check-in lines, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. Perhaps it was just the anxiety that came with being away from home for too long, I told myself. I immersed myself in contract negotiations and corporate deals, determined to push the strange conversation with Samuel to the back of my mind. Yet, as days passed, I began to notice subtle shifts in Michelle's tone during our infrequent phone calls. Her voice, usually warm and reassuring, now carried an edge of vagueness, an evasiveness that I tried desperately to ignore. I rationalized that the stress of managing our home alone was enough to explain any minor changes. After all, a busy life often leaves little room for in-depth conversation, and I was convinced that our connection would remain intact. Back at home, as I continued my relentless pursuit of corporate success, Michelle's nights began to take on a mysterious pattern. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the streets softened to the fading light, she would quietly slip out of the house. Her departures were always wrapped in a cloak of casual excuses, an invitation to meet a friend here, a commitment to a charity event there. These explanations, repeated with a practiced ease, reassured me that her independence was merely an expression of her vibrant social life. I trusted her completely, or so I believed, until Samuel's next call shattered that illusion. A week after our first conversation, on a cool Thursday evening, my phone rang again. Samuel's voice, calm and deliberate as ever, greeted me. "Andrew, I've been keeping an eye on your house while you're away. There's something you need to see." The simplicity of his words left no room for misinterpretation. This wasn't idle gossip or the fantasies of an old man. It was a promise of tangible evidence. He insisted that I remain patient while he gathered more details, a notion that filled me with both dread and a reluctant curiosity. At first, I was torn between disbelief and a growing suspicion that perhaps I had been too complacent about the life Michelle and I had built. Every time I recalled her vague explanations, with a slight hesitations in her tone, I wondered if Samuel might be right. Still, I clung to the comforting belief that nothing was truly amiss, even as a subtle undercurrent of unease began to ripple beneath my everyday routine. As the week wore on and I prepared for my return home, my mind was in turmoil. The usual excitement of reuniting with Michelle was tempered by the ominous tone of Samuel's warnings. The long flight back seemed to stretch out interminably, my thoughts consumed by the possibility that I was about to face a truth I'd never imagined. Unbeknownst to me, while I was engrossed in corporate negotiations and airport lounges, a meticulous investigation was unfolding just a few blocks from our home. Samuel, A retired cop known for his unwavering attention to detail had set his plan into motion. Every taxi that pulled up to our house, every late-night departure, was being noted and scrutinized. His unassuming exterior belied a determined spirit that was now systematically unraveling the fabric of my domestic life. When I finally arrived home on that cool autumn evening, the familiar sights of our quiet suburb did little to dispel the heavy atmosphere that had settled over me. I longed to see Michelle smile, to feel the warmth of her embrace that had always been my anchor. Instead, I felt the weight of an impending revelation with every mile I drove toward our house. Each familiar landmark now seemed to signal the approach of an irreversible truth, a truth that threatened to shatter everything I held dear. Upon my return, I attempted to reintegrate into the comforting routines of home. Michelle greeted me at the door with a practiced smile, and over dinner, she recounted her day in a tone that was both calm and measured. Yet beneath the surface, I sensed a guardedness, a subtle reserve that had not been there before. I couldn't help but recall Samuel's ominous call, and with each passing moment, the feeling of unease deepened. In the days that followed, I found myself obsessively replaying every conversation, every pause in Michelle's explanations. I scoured old text messages and emails, searching for inconsistencies that might reveal hidden truths. To my dismay, everything appeared too ordinary, too routine to warrant suspicion, yet the nagging voice of doubt would not be silenced. It was as if I were living in a world where the perfect facade masked a far more complicated reality. Then, on another chilly Thursday eve, my phone rang unexpectedly once again. This time, Samuel's measured voice cut through the silence with renewed urgency. "Andrew, I hope you're doing well. I have something important to show you," he stated simply. His tone was devoid of preamble, just a calm declaration that left no room for debate. "What did you find, Samuel?" I asked, striving to keep my voice even despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "I've been tracking Michelle's movements every night around 7:30, he explained, as though recounting the predictable cadence of a clock. "I recorded the details, the time, the destination, even the license plates of the taxi she takes. There's also footage from a security camera near your house that caught a taxi arriving at unusual hours. I want you to see the pattern for yourself." His words were clinical, almost detached, yet they carried a weight that made my heart race. Unsure whether I was succumbing to a paranoid fantasy or facing a painful possibility, I agreed to meet Samuel the following day at a modest coffee shop near our neighborhood. When I arrived, Samuel was already there, a worn folder in hand that looked as ordinary as its contents might be consequential. Over 2 steaming cups of black coffee, he began laying out his evidence with the precision of a seasoned investigator. "I started tracking Michelle's movements last week," he began quietly. "Every evening, right around 7:30, she leaves the house in a taxi. Some nights she's headed to a downtown restaurant. On other evenings, I noticed her near an upscale club on Fifth Avenue. There were even times when she made her way toward a hotel in the city center." Samuel's voice was steady, recounting details in a matter-of-fact tone that left little room for interpretation. He then passed me a small USB drive. "Review the footage for yourself, Andrew," he said simply. "I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm giving you the facts." My hands trembled as I accepted the drive, my mind overwhelmed by disbelief, fear, and a profound sorrow. The possibility that Michelle was leading a double life was almost too terrible to accept. That very night, alone in my study, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. The screen flickered as I began to review the evidence Samuel painstakingly collected. At first, I saw nothing more than quiet suburban scenes, taxis idling outside our house, the muted hum of streetlights. But then, as I cross-referenced the timestamps with the evenings when Michelle had claimed to be at charity events or meeting friends, a disturbing pattern emerged. The evidence was subtle at first, a taxi pulling up precisely on schedule, consistent routes taken, and then it became indisputable. Michelle's nightly departures were methodical, deliberate, and cloaked in secrecy. I recalled the one particular evening Samuel had mentioned, a night when a taxi lingered longer than usual and Michelle stepped out with a measured calm. Not the hurried gait of someone returning home in distress, but the composed demeanor of someone who knew exactly where she was going. In one clip, she paused ever so briefly, her eyes scanning the darkened street as if ensuring no one was watching. That small detail, repeated over several nights, resonated with the warning Samuel had given me. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the footage again and again. Every clip, every timestamp, added another piece to the ledger of betrayal that I never believed could be mine. It was a systematic collection of small, calculated actions that together painted a portrait of a life split in two, one side visible to and the other hidden in the shadows of routine. For days afterward, I resolved not to confront Michelle immediately. I needed time to absorb the evidence, to verify every detail, and understand the full scope of what was unfolding before me. I began to meticulously document every observation on my own. Each evening, I would leave home a little earlier than usual, parking discreetly behind a row of hedges near our driveway, and watch. Every night at around 7:30, the familiar scene would play out. Michelle would emerge, dressed with the same poise I'd always admired, and step into a waiting taxi. I noted the taxi's license plate, the time of departure, and even the direction it headed. It was as if I were recording a secret life unfolding right before my eyes, a life that threatened to dismantle everything I believed in. One crisp evening, while sitting in my favorite recliner with a cup of hot coffee, I witnessed a sleek black sedan pull up directly in front of our house. The headlights briefly illuminate the quiet street, and through the lens of my rented camcorder, I recognized Michelle's familiar silhouette. She stepped out, collected her purse with a calm efficiency, and entered the taxi as if it were a mundane part of her routine. For a few agonizing seconds, I watched the taxi's number plate and even caught a fleeting glimpse of the driver's face before the vehicle sped away into the darkness. That same night, I made discreet inquiries with our neighbors. A middle-aged gentleman, preferring to remain anonymous, confirmed that he had seen Michelle enter a luxurious car and drive off toward an upscale restaurant downtown. Another neighbor, a young woman living a few doors down, mentioned that she often heard the low murmur of taxi engines late into the night, and on occasion, recognized a familiar figure stepping out of one of them. Their accounts, paired with Samuel's meticulous records, left little doubt Michelle was living a secret life. Samuel continued to update me over the following days. "Andrew," he said one evening with his characteristic calm, "I followed the trail a bit further last night. Michelle was seen entering a high-end hotel on Central Boulevard, a venue known for discreet, private meetings. I've recorded all the time logs, and the pattern is unmistakable. This isn't random, it's a well-orchestrated routine." His clinical delivery left me no choice but to face the possibility that my life was about to be irrevocably changed. With every new piece of evidence, my inner conflict deepened. Part of me clung to the hope that perhaps I was misinterpreting a series of coincidences, that my mind was overreacting to a series of minor inconsistencies. Yet every timestamp, every video clip, every corroborated account forced me to confront the painful truth. Michelle had been living a double life, one that was as systematic as it was secretive. At last, I decided it was time to confront Michelle directly. One quiet evening, after another long day punctuated by covert observations and sleepless nights, I invited her into our study, the same room where we had once shared our dreams and plans. I spread out the pages of my carefully kept notebook before her, the pages filled with handwritten records of taxi rides, departure times, and observed details. I placed the USB drive on the table as well. With a heavy, measured tone, I said, "Michelle, I have been documenting your nightly routines. I have undeniable proof that you've been leading a double life. I need to know why." For a long, excruciating moment, Michelle's eyes searched mine. Her face, usually so composed, now betrayed a mix of disbelief and resignation. Finally, her voice emerged softly. "Andrew, you're saying that I've been lying to you all this time?" Her tone was measured, as though she were recounting a mundane fact rather than the shattering of our shared life. "I'm simply saying that the evidence does not lie," I replied quietly, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm not here to accuse you without reason. I just need the truth." I slid the USB drive toward her, the physical embodiment of my doubts and fears. Michelle's hands trembled as she accepted the drive. For a long while, she remained silent, her eyes distant as if weighing memories against the undeniable facts before. "It wasn't something I planned, Andrew," she finally said in a tone that was devoid of dramatic flair. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to feel alive. When you were away so often, I felt invisible, as if our life had become too predictable. I needed moments that reminded me I could still experience passion and spontaneity, even if it meant living a double life." Her confession was not marked by tearful outbursts or desperate pleas. It was delivered with the dispassionate clarity of someone explaining an inconvenient truth. "So it was all calculated?" I asked quietly, the word hanging in the air like an accusation. "It wasn't calculated like a heist or a meticulously planned con," she explained evenly. "It was more than I allowed myself to be carried away by the circumstances. I wasn't searching for some grand, passionate affair. I just needed to break free from the suffocating predictability of our routine." Her tone was flat, clinical, as if describing a minor change in the weather rather than the unraveling of our marriage. For what felt like an eternity, we sat in silence. The room was filled with the quiet hum of the overhead light and the weight of every moment that had led us here. Finally, I said, "I need time to think about this, about us, about what comes next." Michelle nodded, her expression unreadable. "Take all the time you need, Andrew," she replied softly. In the days that followed, I re-examined every shred of evidence. I retraced every taxi ride, every restaurant visit, every detail that confirmed Michelle's clandestine routine. Samuel continued to update me sporadically, always with the same detached clarity. His reports were unembellished, yet each one hammered home the systematic nature of Michelle's nightly departures. There was no sign of spontaneity, only a precise and methodical escape from a life that had grown too predictable. I began to see the betrayal as not a sudden, explosive revelation but as a gradual, creeping erosion of everything I once believed in. Each documented detail was a reminder that our comfortable, orderly life had slowly become a prison for both of us, a prison that pushed her to seek freedom in the anonymity of the night. I even started keeping a separate journal, where I recorded my own observations of the small changes in her behavior, the brief pauses before answering my calls, the unintentional sighs, and the distant look in her eyes when I asked about her day. One rainy Wednesday, driven by the desperate need for certainty, I left home earlier than usual. I parked discreetly behind a row of hedges near our driveway and waited. As predicted, around 7:30 p.m., I saw Michelle step out of our house in a measured, almost ritualistic manner. Clad in a stylish coat and carrying herself with a familiar confidence, she walked toward the waiting taxi without a hint of hesitation. I managed to catch a glimpse of the taxi's identification and noted every detail in my journal. That small, silent observation confirmed what I had long feared. Michelle's double life was not a fleeting mistake. It was a deliberate routine. Finally, unable to bear the mounting evidence in the silent torment of half-truths any longer, I arranged one final, decisive meeting with Michelle. We sat together at our kitchen table, the same table where we had once planned our future over countless cups of coffee. I've thought long and hard about everything, I began slowly, and while I understand that our routine left you feeling isolated, I can't ignore the fact that you chose this secret life over our marriage. Michelle's eyes met mine, resigned yet resolute. I know, Andrew, she said quietly. I've been living two separate lives for too long, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what we once had. There were no dramatic gestures, only a quiet, mutual acknowledgement that our lives had diverged irreparably. In that quiet moment, as the weight of every carefully documented detail pressed down on us, I realized that the truth was found not in explosive confrontations or tearful declarations, but in the unyielding evidence of everyday actions. The routine of betrayals, the systematic documentation of nightly departures, and the steady accumulation of undeniable facts had dismantled the illusion of our perfect life. Over the following weeks, I attempted to piece together a new identity from the fragments of the life that had been shattered. I revisited old passions and slowly started to accept that every ending is also the beginning of something. Yet, the memories of those long nights, the quiet unraveling of trust, and the relentless documentation of Michelle's secret life lingered like shadows in my mind, reminders that even the most predictable routines can hide the most extraordinary secrets. Today, as I move forward, I understand that life is inherently messy and unpredictable. The experience has taught me that trust, once broken, leaves scars that never entirely fade, but also that there is courage in facing the truth, however painful it may be. Although I carry the weight of betrayal, I now see that every moment, every carefully observed detail, has helped me rediscover who I am. I choose to embrace a future built on honesty, however imperfect it might be, and to remember that even in the depths of sorrow, there can be renewal. In the wake of our painful parting, I found myself at a crossroads, one that demanded a reckoning with both the fragments of a shattered past and the promise of an uncertain future. Every day, as I navigated the aftermath of betrayal, memories of those long, lonely nights surged unexpectedly, blending with a cautious hope that came with each sunrise. In my search for solace, I began frequenting a quiet city park where the rustling autumn leaves and the gentle murmur of distant conversations reminded me that life, much like nature, was in a state of perpetual renewal. Sitting on a worn wooden bench beneath an old oak, I allowed myself to reflect on the layers of my existence. The pain of Michelle's duplicity had carved deep scars, yet it also forced me into a period of introspection and growth. I gradually realized that trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt over time, not by forgetting the past, but by learning from it and embracing a newfound resilience. I started to record my thoughts in a journal, each entry marking small steps from despair toward healing. The act of writing became a quiet rebellion against the overwhelming, a way to transform raw emotion into the clarity of self-awareness. My evenings, once darkened by suspicion and sorrow, began to soften with the gentle rhythms of self-discovery. I took up meditation in long, solitary walks that offered a temporary reprieve from the storm of emotions. Under the soft glow of twilight, I would revisit memories of brighter days, not to wallow in what was lost, but to remind myself of the love and warmth that had once defined my life. Those recollections, bittersweet yet illuminating, became a quiet guide for what I hoped to rebuild, a life anchored in honesty and emotional courage. Amid this internal journey, unexpected kindness began to pierce the glow. Jacob, an old friend whose compassionate nature had always been a quiet constant, reached out and offered both a listening ear and a supportive presence. Our spontaneous coffee dates and impromptu weekend hikes gradually reintroduced me to the simple pleasures of companionship and shared laughter. With Jacob's help, I rediscovered parts of the city I had long neglected, and through those adventures, I began to see that even when shadows loom, new experiences and connections can bring light into one's life. I also found comfort in joining a local support group for people who, like me, had suffered personal betrayals. In that safe, understanding circle, I shared my story and listened to others recount their struggles. The realization that I was not alone in this journey was both humbling and empowering. In our collective vulnerability, I learned that healing is not a solitary path but a communal process, one woven together by shared experiences, mutual empathy, and the strength to face our innermost wounds. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly learned to forgive, not only Michelle, but also myself. I came to understand that in our quest for stability, we sometimes overlook the subtle shifts that signal deeper discontent. Embracing that painful lesson, I resolved to rebuild my life piece by fragile piece, with honesty as my cornerstone. I re-engaged with hobbies I once loved, rekindled old friendships, and allowed myself to dream again. I began to see my scars as emblems of resilience rather than mere reminders of loss, each one a testament to the strength that emerged from vulnerability. Now, as I continue down this winding path of recovery, I hold on to the belief that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning, a promise of renewal even in the face of overwhelming adversity. The journey is far from over, but with each step forward, I reclaim a part of myself that I thought was lost forever.